Much for joining today. I have three categories of things I thought it would be most helpful to talk about. So I'm going to start with historical context for what's going on to kind of ground the chaos that Trump and Musk are causing generally, but also specifically to the markets and especially to the cryptocurrency markets, because we do have, I think, analogous. There have been times in the past that were sort of similar, although Trump is like totally an anomaly in a bunch of ways. And I know that, especially for less experienced traders, some of the scariest moments look like how things look right now, right? So I want to try and share some experience and some information that will hopefully quell fears that you're having. I'm going to share from there practical tips that I found helpful. And I'll bring in my experience. I mentioned this if you saw the emails as a Wall Street trader, right? And I started professionally trading in April of 2008. So it was like literally right as the stock market was starting to crash. And there were certain things I learned coming up in that sort of tense environment that were really helpful lessons. And they also translate into what's going on today. And then finally, and in the sort of, I think the most important aspect of this in the longer term is to talk about the future vision and a spiritual context and the role that I'm seeing Musk and Trump playing in what I feel I've been talking about for many years, this fall of the dysfunction in the old systems, especially in late stage capitalism. I think that's why Musk is so prominent right now, because he's literally the richest person in history, like within the capitalist regime. And so it makes sense, I think, in that from that vantage point that he would be so visible and so powerful right now and so increasingly like obviously ridiculous, which doesn't make what he's doing any less scary. So I want to share all of that, and I hope that in doing this it's helpful to you, and I hope that it also just makes you feel a little bit better. I know that I've been feeling isolated through a lot of this. And that's like the trick of this type of oppressive energy, right? Like it makes us feel like we're alone when so many of us feel similarly. So we just need to find one another and connect with one another. So I'm hoping that in trying to share thoughts like these, it will offer some of that comfort and more of us can maybe find one another through seeds and just generally so that we can share and come together to create, the better systems that are coming after this, which I'm convinced seeds, is going to play an important part. So thanks for joining again. I'll hop in. All right. I have to start with historical context. Oh, and at the end too, and as ever, like feel free to post questions or things you'd like to discuss in the chat. And I'm happy to do my best to talk about any of those things, share whatever insight I might have about anything you're thinking about. I thought we could go here first, okay? So this looks boring, sorry, but in terms of historical context, right? If we're talking about the cryptocurrency markets specifically, things, if you're not familiar, have tended to move in these 4-ish year cycles as a result of isn't quite the right phase, but the Bitcoin halving event, which happens roughly every 4 years, has kind of been this catalyst. Okay. And you may already be aware that the most recent Bitcoin halving was April 20th of last year, 2024, which also interestingly was the same day that Jupiter and Uranus they were conjunct in Taurus, I believe, which was for my astrology heads, it was just it was super interesting that that lined up and certainly didn't seem coincidental. So that was April 2024, right? The halving prior to that was in May of 2020. Okay. So given that, I wanted to look at what was going on around that time. And I found this. I think the memory of this came in. I was either meditating or taking a shower and recall that this had happened. Let me make sure you can see that. So this was an article from Monday, March 9th of 2020. So almost exactly 5 years ago today. Literally, we can see in this video, like, it says, like, watch the stock market close after its worst day since 2008. And I remembered that I'd sent an email to the seeds community at that time, and I found the email. This was March 10th, so it was the following day. So the stock market had just had its largest single day loss ever at that time, almost exactly 5 years ago. Trump was in office then as well. And back then, it had to do with with COVID and uncertainty surrounding what Trump was going to do in the United States to deal with COVID and what was going to happen with lockdowns and so forth. And I remember I sent this email and I talked about how it was interesting that, yeah, I talked about how like there were signs that crypto was becoming a more established place to store value when the traditional markets go haywire. And it looked like that for like a day. And then the next day, cryptocurrency came down a lot as well. So I think this is an important inflection point in showing that the institutionalization of cryptocurrency has meant that since this time, I think this really was like the fork in the road. The way that sort of the quote unquote established, like larger market cap cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether have moved has started to really coincide with the way the traditional stock market is moving. So that's just something I think it's important to be aware of and useful to be aware of. But from there, if we go back to the halving like list of dates, so that was March 9th of 2020, right? Um, the halving event, the third halving, if you can see this here, was May 11th of 2020. So almost exactly 2 months after that. Thanks, Paul. That's sweet. So this I think is helpful to be aware of. They haven't updated this. I was just thinking that I should actually write my own blog post for the Seeds website about this because this was like the best information I could find online, but they're not updating it, so I could provide a more updated version. I'm gonna put this link in the chat if you want to actually look at it directly. So if we check this out, we can see something useful that they provide is like the lowest price for Bitcoin and the highest price for Bitcoin in each of those cycles. Okay, so if we look at the third halving event again, which was May 11th of 2020, so 2 months after that market crash. So the market, as happens, whenever it really rapidly declines or whenever it really rapidly increases, there's going to be a retracement, and the retracement in the other direction is often as quick and sort of as it can come back to nearly where it was previously. It's sort of like a bouncing ball or something like that. It'll come back up in most cases. And that's why I'll just share this practical tip now, I guess, then, since I'm talking about it. But in those moments where it looks like really scary and really uncertain because it just came down a bunch, if you still believe in the cryptocurrencies that you have chosen to own, then those are the best opportunities to get involved, even more so to buy when it's more affordable, right? When the price is down. But if you've learned something that tells you that you no longer want to own that cryptocurrency, if new information has come in and you just want out, you can wait for those retracements because then you're getting out, at a better price. It's going to mitigate your losses. And it's easy to say, but difficult to do. It really takes practice. It's sort of like building a muscle because you're often going to find that you're so stressed out in those moments that even if you intellectually understand that concept, it can be difficult to do. So that's why kind of getting in your trading reps, um, yeah, just developing through actually practicing, actually making trades is so essential. It's really like an experiential, uh, you really need to learn experientially as far as trading is concerned. Okay, so if we look at the third halving here in 2020, May 2020, the lowest price of Bitcoin in that cycle was, according to this, was 85.90 US dollars. And then the highest price in April of 2024, so right before the next Bitcoin halving event happened, the most recent one, the highest price was 73,628. Okay, so that's a significant increase in a relatively short amount of time. And we have some data here about the fourth halving cycle, the cycle we're about a year into right now, 11 months into or so. But this hasn't been updated because Bitcoin has been up around $100,000. So in that context, we can kind of see that there have been these wild fluctuations in past cycles. And Trump was in office for that previous cycle, right? Trump 2.0 is certainly more extreme. He's angrier. He's probably more reactive, I think, than he was back then. And also, we have Musk now, which is a whole additional variable that we have to consider. But we do have some precedent to kind of have some sense of how these things look and how they looked in the past and how they went and maybe where these opportunities can be. So let's also take a look at the prices. This is like a 5-year graph. Paul's like, yes, Ether is getting crushed. Yeah, it totally is. And that's a good segue, I think, into mentioning. So I'm going to look at the Bitcoin price first here and share that with y'all. And this is just the general, as you can see, like the Google, what Google shows you if you search for the Bitcoin price. Excuse me. There's been something kind of interesting happening in that with this institutionalization of cryptocurrency, where like private equity firms and hedge funds have been buying into cryptocurrency, they're more focused on Bitcoin. There's less interest so far in any other cryptocurrency, including Ether. Ether's this Ethereum, the crypto network, is the second largest by market capitalization, and it's a little newer than Bitcoin is as well. So I don't know. I wasn't anticipating this exactly, and I thought they'd be more up on what is going on than I think they've proven to be. Because you might have heard me say this before, but Ether in many ways improves upon what Bitcoin is doing because the Ethereum system allows you to build on top of the network through what are called smart contracts. So software developers can build projects on top of Ethereum in a way that Bitcoin was never designed to facilitate. And that was intentional. That was an improvement that they wanted to make that was going to be harder to try and do if you were looking at sort of the original Bitcoin system. And Bitcoin is the pioneering cryptocurrency. It's the oldest cryptocurrency. It's now 16 years old as of January of this year. So for that reason, because so many projects have built and can build on top of Ethereum, there are greater network effects, right? There are going to be more people who are interested in the project succeeding because they're actively invested in its success, And I think that, there have been a lot of Ethereum competitors that have come on the scene since. And sometimes I ask myself, like, am I being too old school? Which like isn't actually that long ago in the world of cryptocurrency because things have moved fast and it's not that old. But I'll wonder, like, am I being too old school and like continuing to believe that Ethereum is the best of other projects that have emerged that have also made it possible to build on top of the network? But I don't think that anything has come out that is better than Ethereum at doing what Ethereum does. It has a lot of flaws still. It definitely needs to improve in important ways for scalability, including like gas fees. That's the biggest thing really, because if you're just a casual user, you don't want to pay a ton of money to send your funds, right? And sometimes gas fees, transaction costs have been ridiculously high, especially when the market's going crazy. So anyway, I thought that traditional finance would be better at recognizing the potential in those network effects in Ethereum, but that hasn't really happened yet. So, in my view, I think that means that Ether is actually really undervalued right now. And especially, that was part of the reason I wanted to do this live, like now, because literally the price right now is 1859, y'all. This 1838, I just refreshed it. So I'm going to talk about price floors and price levels and how to figure out where to buy so that you're not doing what traders call catching a falling knife, where things are just coming down, they're coming down really rapidly. And you're in this danger of getting cut because it's so rapid. And that's a challenging thing. Picking price levels can be very challenging, especially if you're a newer trader, just a casual trader. But we're going to talk a bit about that. But those moments where it looks, the least certain, to reiterate, I know I've said a version of this before, but it's just such an important thing to try and just get in your muscles, to habitually remember, if you still believe in the project, like maybe you've learned something about Ether that makes you think like, oh, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to own Ether. There are other projects I'm more interested in. Maybe you just don't think that it has the longevity that you previously thought. Whatever the reason is, if that's the case, again, I'd still suggest waiting for that likely retracement in price when the market bounces, because you can get out and mitigate your losses, or maybe even still see some profitability if you do it that way. But if you still believe in a project, and for me personally, I'm a pretty big believer in Ether. I don't think it's perfect. There are flaws. I have some frustrations, but overall, I'm just like very excited about what it has done and what it will do. This looks like a fucking great deal, you know? Like it's come down so much so quickly. That's the other thing. If you can catch those rapid drops before they bounce, then you can get into a situation where your trade is profitable relatively quickly and it's so much easier to hold. That said, Trump is an anomaly. He's unpredictable in certain ways. I mean, he's predictable in the sense that he's driven by like vengeance and narcissism, but based on what I've read, it sounds like he's heavily influenced by the last conversation that he had with somebody when making these decisions, which helps to explain why he like waffled on tariffs. That was just last week, wasn't it? Yeah, it was last week, within 24 hours or whatever it was. So, with this drop here, I mean, I don't know that the savviest, most aware trader in the world could have predicted that he would have done what he did and caused these market fluctuations in such a way. So I think this is sort of a special circumstance because it was particularly difficult to be able to have a good idea about where this price floor was going to be, because Trump did stuff that, only Trump understood, that only Trump knew he was going to do, kind of thing. Or certainly, like most traders didn't have any awareness of what that was going to be. I guess you could speculate that, yeah, because Trudeau sort of called him out a little bit, and because the Wall Street Journal said that his tariffs were dumb, like literally printed that headline, you could assume based on what we know about Trump that maybe he would get mad and maybe that would mean he wanted to do it more, I guess. I grew up with a narcissistic parent, and I feel like in some ways that was training for what's going on with like a narcissistic person like that in charge of the currently the most powerful country in the world. Yeah, so that's, I think, a segue into looking more closely at Ether specifically. I think we should look at Bitcoin too. I've said this before. If any of this is redundant, I apologize. But for those who aren't aware, Bitcoin's still kind of like, what's the word? Harbinger is not the word because that has a negative connotation. Bitcoin's a barometer for what is going on in the market at large. And that's pretty much been true since more than one cryptocurrency existed. But it's kind of changed in recent years because there's this greater institutional support for Bitcoin than there is for any other cryptocurrency. So, yeah, let's look at Ether real quick here. This is Gemini's interface. I don't recommend any centralized cryptocurrency exchange. This is a centralized cryptocurrency exchange. I'm actively in litigation against Gemini right now, and it's been going on for like years. So I wish I could tell you that there was a centralized exchange that is good, but I have not come across one. And it seems like that's getting worse. Like more, I mean, I feel like that's Trump's role, though. Also, certain things are being revealed that maybe you suspected before, but now they're just like blatantly in your face. And I don't mean that it's only Trump's support that is problematic in the cryptocurrency world. The Gemini founders each gave Trump $1 million in Bitcoin. And yeah, just as an aside, I feel some satisfaction that they're so quickly seeing him crash the markets because allegedly they did this because they thought it would be good for the markets and they didn't do it because I feel like that wasn't the real reason that they were making these decisions. There were other things going on for them, whether they were conscious or unconscious. So in some senses, yeah, like I said in an email, I feel some schadenfreude for this, but it's hurting us at the same time. So maybe that isn't actually what Schadenfreude is if it hurts you too. But looking at this graph, this is my sort of segue into like the practical tips section. Um, Although, actually, I should say one more thing. When I was a pro Wall Street trader and I was just getting started, like I mentioned, in April of 2008, when the traditional market started crashing and like big banks were failing and so forth, at that time, what I learned was that gold stocks were going up, gold ETFs, exchange traded funds. So they were like stocks that rested on the value of gold. And the reason that was happening was because people didn't trust the stock market at that time. So they thought like, oh, I need gold. I need something tangible, a tangible asset that is more reliable. So they were buying gold, and that therefore drove the price of gold stocks up as well. And I wanted to share that because the lesson in that was that you can always find a way to be profitable if you're just keeping an eye out for what's going on. And you can kind of put yourself in the mindset, maybe you're already in the mindset of, what a lot of people are probably thinking. Because as much as the market is depicted as though it's about math and analytics and algorithmic trading with quantum computers and so forth, like, yeah, those aspects of that world certainly exist. But at the end of the day, it's a bunch of people who are in here who are motivated by, it's like 80s ethos, Reagan era, greed is good kind of idea, greed and fear, unfortunately. So that's what's making these moves. It's people freaking out or feeling like, oh, I got to get in before it's too late, FOMO sort of thing. And that's, like yet another reason that I think society is going to outgrow this kind of design soon, because we're shifting away from fear-based paradigms and structures and into something that I think is more about abundance and caring and just sort of higher vibratory energies. And I think that's what Seeds is a part of. But we still live in this world today. This is our reality right now. So if we're looking at this tool, we're looking at the markets and using this graph, and we're trying to figure out like what to do. So as I shared, see, they made this even. I used to go to Gemini even though I didn't like them, because you could at least read their graphs pretty easily, more so than I thought you could on other centralized exchanges. But they made the graphs worse. So that's another annoying thing about them. But actually, is this even that helpful? Because you can't even see the price very well now. Okay. I don't need this to be here, y'all. Sorry to complain. I just get so frustrated with like these billion-dollar companies that still don't have tools that are like good for people to use. You know what I'm saying? I guess I'll go smaller so you can actually see the numbers. So this is tricky. It's not something that you're, I think, going to be able to walk away with um, and be able to then do repeatably just from listening to, a single session or something like that. It's again, it's a muscle that you build. It's an experiential lesson that you learn. But if you're like me, for instance, if we're using me as an example, I'm looking at this. I know that I still like Ether. I still believe in Ether longer term. Therefore, because the price has just come down a bunch, I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. Like, I really want to buy more. But of course, in doing so, I'm hoping that I can buy more at the best possible price available, right? And the other piece of that is that even if my idea is right longer term, like I am right that Ether is going to go back up and break through its previous all-time highs of around $4,800 a coin, it's still going to be harder to hold if, for example, I bought right now and it's at 1828, but then it goes down to below 1800 or something like that. If that happens, it's just going to be more uncomfortable to try and hold, especially if I'm more actively trading. It just makes it more difficult. So that's why trying to figure out where that price floor is going to be is really helpful, because if you're buying at the floor, I mean, that's the ideal, right? Because if it's the floor, that's literally going to be the lowest price for this move. And then it becomes really easy to hold, especially if the bounce is quick, because then you're in the money relatively quickly, right? The other thing about this, though, is that I'm trying to decide like what's most useful to share in a single session. You can try and choose different levels, but okay, if we're looking at this graph here, different, I should say, like micro levels around what seems to be a price floor. So look, this is so stupid because now you can't even see the. Okay, I'll stop complaining. I'm sorry. But yeah, if we look at this, we can see that it does look like something of a price floor has been established. And it looks like it's around, the lowest was maybe, can't even tell because the stupid thing appears, like 1812 so far. But it's been bouncing around at 1820-ish or so. And we can see that it looks like it's bounced off of that like one, two, three. This is a little debatable because it's more like 1860s. We'll say like 4 or 5 times. It's bounced off that roughly 1820-ish price level. So that makes it look like it is something of a price floor. Whenever we see the price bounce repeatedly off of a level, it's like every time it bounces off of that level and comes back up, it's like that price floor then becomes stronger. And that's also true for price ceilings if we're looking at a graph and we're trying to decide where to sell. So because it's at 1826 right now, I kind of want to, this is the 1 hour time interval as well. So we could look at like the 30-minute graph to get a sense of like a shorter time frame. Paul says a lot of gatekeeping in the centralized exchanges. Yeah, especially, I mean, I feel really bad about what's going on in India and the way things are going with that. Paul's like, so if Ether corrects like 30% in a month now, does that bring seeds too? Yeah, good question. Yeah, seeds moves heavily like at this stage of the game where, and I'll talk more about this as well, how it fits into, I think, the larger picture. Seeds moves like totally with Ether right now, like almost exclusively with Ether. So yeah, that'll bring seeds back too. Um, Assuming that something else doesn't happen where like a bunch of seeds were sold or something like that. But from what I can see there, I don't see a likelihood that that would happen. But yeah, overall, and for the past bunch of years, seeds has really moved with Ether, really closely with Ether. Um, and that should change as the project continues to mature and more people are aware of it. But I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that too in like future vision, in my future vision segment of this talk. So yeah, with this, I would just say that the other piece of trying to choose a price level, a price floor, if you decide you want to buy more when it's cheap, is if you can, this isn't always possible, if you can see when like a catalyzing event is materializing and get in just as that is happening, it also makes it like way easier to hold. By that, I mean, maybe there's a news announcement or something that says, we'll say Trump again, I guess, for example, because his actions are influencing this most heavily. Excuse me. Maybe he says something that it ends up being good for the markets. And if we see that happening, or if maybe we hear about it before it's in the mainstream news somehow, maybe in, I don't know, there's like a good Reddit sub that you're in or something. There aren't really very many good crypto Reddit subs in my experience. The Ethereum sub is okay though. And Ether Trader is okay. ETH Trader, ETH Trader. That sub is okay too. Anyway, you want to try and see if you can catch those because again, it becomes easier to hold because even if your idea is right longer term, like I said before, if this drops another X amount of dollars, it's just going to be more difficult and more stressful to hold until you're back in the money. You know what I'm saying? So if you can catch those catalyzing events, that's great. It's not always possible. If you're trading more casually than just setting up something like dollar cost averaging, fiat cost averaging is a better way to go because you can just say like, yeah, I want to put $50 toward this every week or whatever it is. And then you're just getting in regardless of what the market's doing. So you still benefit from buying when it's low if it goes back up, but you don't have to stress out about the level so much. But yeah, for the more active traders, I wanted to share this. So if I'm looking at this, like you can see below, I made some recent trades like 10 days ago. I had some money come in and wanted to take advantage of this drop. So I was buying 2083, 2036, 2103, 2160. So given that, that's the other thing, like what I was touching on earlier, I didn't know that Trump was going to do something else to make the trade war worse. Oh, check this out. So it just dropped a bit more. But now this graph is so terrible. It actually didn't, did it? Because it was 1825 a second ago. Anyway, yeah, so I was buying around best price 2036, right? And I was pretty happy with that because at that time it looked like 2000 was going to be something of a price floor, but it slipped below that floor. So that means that even though I still feel very confident about this position longer term, that it could reverse hopefully relatively quickly. That, I mean, like my experienced graphical data shows us that those reverses can happen and often do happen very quickly, like I said before, because prices bounce if they come down fast in many cases. So even though I think that's going to happen, and I think this price looks pretty good overall, it would have been really awesome if I'd been able to be buying it 1815 or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So this is an example of it just being a little bit harder to hold, a little bit more annoying whenever you're not able to catch that price floor. But you can't always do it, especially in times like now where we don't have that sort of predictability because Trump is so erratic. Um, yeah. I mean, I don't, like I said earlier, I don't know if anybody could have predicted that. So I'm not being too hard on myself about this. And I think it is going to be perhaps a very profitable trade, you know, like in the near term and longer term, I think it could be like super profitable. So there's that. All right. Paul says, agreed. I thought so too. 2K would be resistance for Ether. Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, that makes sense, right? And I guess we've talked about this some in the course. Paul has been in our course before. You know, like if it's like a round number, a psychologically significant number like 2000, this shows how dumb and emotional trading can be too, because there isn't like sort of like a real mathematical reason behind that. It's just that people see like, oh, 2000, that seems like it's a big important number. So literally for that reason, something can be established as a price floor or a price ceiling, and you know, for no reason beyond that. So yeah, that also made it seem likelier that it stood to reason that 2000 was probably a pretty good place to be buying. And I was trying to buy a little bit above 2000 because sometimes when things come down rapidly, if you put a limit order in, which means you're saying the specific price you want to buy at, sometimes if you say like exactly 2000, because it's bouncing, it won't go down far enough to completely fill your order. So what I typically find to be more beneficial is to put in an order at a price a little bit above what I'm perceiving to be the price floor. But yeah, it slipped more because of his announcements like 2 days later. But we did have this bounce up to almost 2,600. Um, well, that was the day before. Hmm. I should have looked more at the specific news events on those days. I guess it's not really that important. I'm wondering if this was like a buy the rumor, sell the news kind of thing. Like people were anticipating something happening with the tariffs. So there was the sell off, then the tariffs. Yeah, I think that might have been what happened. Then the tariffs happened around here, and there was a bit of a bounce in relation to like the rumor and then the news. Just to share that idea, if it's unfamiliar, something that traders will say is, and I'm not certain that that's what happened here, but it would have been right around that time because that's also when I was buying on March 3rd. There's this idea of buying the rumor and selling the news. So when you're hearing about something happening, that's when the trades are often starting to coalesce and appear on the markets. And when the news event actually happens, a lot of the time the price is already built in, it's priced into the market. So you've quote unquote missed the move. So a lot of traders will quote unquote buy the rumor and then sell the news because they think that the price move has already happened by the time the news has come out. And therefore, you know, that's the end of that possibility for profitability as related to that news event. You know what I'm saying? So that's something else to be aware of, especially in current times where things are like especially news driven because they've been so dependent on what Trump is doing, and it's having this global effect outside of what's going on in the States. Jennifer says impressive in both their intensity and frequency. What do you mean? So, all right, let's talk about future vision. Um, this is the most important, what I feel most passionate about. You probably know this already. What I feel is it's like the point of all of this, right? Like I talk about trading in conventional markets in the sense that trading on centralized cryptocurrency exchanges is conventional because I want to try and be helpful to people within the context of the reality that we're in right now, you know? But the reason I do any of this is because it's about using seeds as a tool to help us get out of this current mess that we're in, which I think is in so many ways a function of what's messed up about this old system, especially the economic system. I'm sorry if you've heard me say versions of this before, but for anyone who's, like who hasn't heard me vocalize these ideas, I think that late stage capitalism it's sort of like the water and we're the fish. It's just everywhere. We're just used to this idea that we're supposed to work jobs that often enrich in oligarchs now in order to get the money that we need to survive. We're supposed to trade our time for money, and we try to free ourselves from that by like building passive incomes and stuff. But it's just I think it's perhaps the biggest there's such a cost because human potential is robbed because so many of us are trying to fit ourselves into jobs established by somebody else, often a corporation, that aren't actually the thing that we are uniquely here as humans to do, you know? And I think humanity has to get away from that, just as we had to get away from having a feudal system 1,000 years ago or whatever it would have been in the West. So in the West, if we're talking about England. I'm not a history buff, if that's not obvious, but I think we're reaching this inflection point where society is about to come out of a lot of these traps. And I think the foundation for that is what I've referred to as like wounded masculine energy, which I think is in everybody, virtually everybody, unless you're like super healed. But it's this idea that we're supposed to be productive all the time, that we're not supposed to like equally value our emotions. We're not supposed to be, it's less important to be receptive. It's less valued if you're creative, if you're intuitive. We see it literally like in the healthcare system in the States, in the care professions where people are literally paid less money. And we have to get out of that. And I think we're about to get out of that. So, coming back to that, I think we needed to look at the foundations of the economic system itself. And literally, I've made videos about this on YouTube if you feel like looking for them. But the ideas behind the capitalistic system that much of the world now is under. I mean, even if you're looking at China, I think that's a form of state capitalism. It's not quite like I think those similar wounded masculine energies have also been present in the forms of communism that we've seen so far. There's like a more evolved, more healed version of socialism, I think, in Northern European countries in a lot of cases. But this like American capitalistic thing in particular has kind of dominated the world now for what, since the industrial era. And we need to come out of it. We need to get away from it. And if we go back to the ideas that are like foundational for that, it's like Adam Smith writing The Wealth of Nations 250-ish years ago. And I've shared this before too, but actually, I'm going to pull up his quote if I can find it. Um, this is actually funny. You might have heard me say this before too, but okay, let's go back to this. So he has this like famous quote, right? It's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interests. So he's essentially saying that like self interest is the reason that people do anything economic, right? And a funny and tragic thing about this is that while he wrote these words, he was literally living with his mom, and his mom then presumably gave him dinner every night. And we can assume that she wasn't paid for it and that she probably wasn't feeding her child exclusively out of her own self-interest. She probably loved her kid, right? And so it just shows that like the person who's like the father of this idea, the father of economics, modern economics, he was so blind to the idea of what I'll call a feminine energetic contribution of an act of caring that he didn't even understand that that should be considered as valuable. And so it's completely excluded from this economic system that he designed. And we're coming out of that now, I think. But in order to do that, we have to go back to the foundations of like why the economic system is the way that it is. And it's zero sum. It's this idea of, you know, it's transactional only because of stuff that Adam Smith said. But society itself also has to grow out of that, you know, like, and that's a good segue, I think, too. I think the reason that seeds hasn't popped yet, the main reason is that the energies aren't there yet. That doesn't mean that I don't need to be doing things differently as like the founder of Seeds. And there are many improvements that Seeds still needs to make, especially in terms of product. And I'm really trying to get the word out about what Seeds is. And I hope that y'all will share about Seeds as well. And if you have any other ideas about how we can make more people who are like-minded aware of what's going on with Seeds, like please totally share them. But I also think that we have to get away from like that old system needs to die more so before Seeds is really going to be able to go. And I think that's why Musk, as I touched on earlier, is so prominent right now because, and it's so like he's doing so many hilariously embarrassing things in addition to like the horrifying stuff he's doing. Like, did y'all see how he lied about, I don't even know what video game it was, but he was like pretending to be the best person in the world at some video game? Like the level of insecurity and whatever. And this wasn't obvious to people a few short years ago, you know? And so it's really interesting to see the way that what's going on right now, these energies are exposing this stuff that people didn't use to question. And so it makes sense to me that the best beneficiary so far of the old economic system, Elon Musk, is going to be the one who sort of like jumps the shark in terms of capitalism as a system. And so it's been satisfying to me in the last couple of days when he's lost whatever, like $16 billion as people are protesting and whatever, all of that. So yeah, I think that Seeds can't really go until more of that energy clears. So that means at this time we can keep preparing and trying to improve the existent ecosystem. And yeah, like I said, I welcome your suggestions, especially about how to share about it, because I'm really trying. I also kind of feel like there's some energetic barriers there, though, even like through YouTube that are happening. I'm going to try to write a book because some of these ideas are more complex. I think like putting it in that format could also be helpful. And we're just going to need to shift into this environment where people are comfortable asking for help, because I was sort of surprised to the extent that we run into that with even people that are active in the Seeds community. Like literally yesterday, I replied to an email from someone who's given through Seeds for years. And she was quick to like send a friend, like she made a request to help her friend through Seeds when her friend was at risk of homelessness. She's this really generous, giving person, and she has cancer. And in the email, I was encouraging her, like, you should use Seed. Like, she said she has debt because it's the fucking United States. So, like, healthcare for people with metastatic cancer isn't covered. And I mean, I get so angry when I see about like Seeds having to fill the gaps where like government, where we're forced to pay taxes, that forces us to pay taxes, isn't taking care of people. But that's an aside. But I was encouraging her, like, you should use Seeds. So there are all these internal blocks that people have that I think are energetic as well, that we're going to have to clear too. So there's sort of this frictionless experience of asking for help and giving help and so forth. And the Seeds product needs to improve, but I think the bones have been there for a long time. It's more about connecting with more like-minded people, sharing this, and waiting for the energies to clear, I think, frankly. I think it's been a little bit of this like trial by fire. And I think, to share this too, like some of y'all know that I got robbed late last year. And I was super upset about it. It like triggered all this wounding that I have about not having my needs met and so forth. And I know that it was also a gift in a bunch of ways, because it forced me to ask for help. It made me get better at asking for help. So now I feel a lot more comfortable doing that than I did before. And it also showed me who was there to help me and who wasn't. And that made me understand more about how I need to interact with the Seeds community, because I realized that I'd been giving in certain ways that were depleting me, that weren't actually being received. And I think on a personal level, like that has to do with the family I grew up in and having a narcissistic parent and stuff and being the scapegoat kid. So I also had to get out of this habit, and I'm still working on it, of like giving too much to the people who aren't actually interested in receiving what I'm offering. And I think a lot about how, with any founder, this is why so much of big tech I think is messed up. The stuff that the founder hasn't healed, it shows up in their organizations. And so it has to be dealt with. Like, that's even more reason that it needs to be healed, you know? So that's my own responsibility in terms of my own work, and also like what needs to be done through seeds. So I think that time is coming, and it might happen sooner than we think. Um, and I think it could be a really interesting next couple years, but it's probably going to be a chaotic next couple years as well. Um, so I'll go back to the chat. Jennifer's like, I don't think Trump could predict Trump. Yeah, totally, because like he doesn't know what he's going to do 30 minutes later. Yeah, I'm so with you. Paul says, yes, thank you for letting me complete the course. That's nice, Paul. Thank you for being a part of it. Oh, that's what Jennifer's talking about. Impressive in both their intensity and frequency. Got it. Okay, Trump's tantrums. Paul says, happy that EU, Canada are not submitting to their bullying. Yeah, it's been cool to see. Oh my gosh. And I mean, I continue to think that the economic system is the foundation of all of this, because like we have these oligarchs in power. I mean, Trump appointing so many like billionaires to his cabinet is more of a showing of this. But the governing systems are going to have to also change, and I think they also rest on this wounded masculine energy. So that's going to get fleshed out as well. And you know what'll come out of it, I think, will be healthier. But yeah, it's crazy. Paul says, "Go seeds! Seeds holders assemble and end late stage capitalism." Yeah, yes, best way to put it. They are exposed. You dealt with it like a champ, Rachel. So much respect and power to you. Thank you, Paul. You're very nice. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Yeah, so is there anything else y'all want to talk about, or anything I could share that would be more helpful in terms of like anything, practical tips, anything in my past experience trading? Like maybe I should take us actually back to, let's look at this again for context. Again, I feel like I'm using the word context a lot. I think we saw something in the chat, but I'll leave you with this. To ground, that's another word that could be used instead of contextualize. Like if we just look at these prices again, right? Like, so 5 years ago, third halving cycle, the lows in May in Bitcoin were 85.90. And then the highs in April of 2024 were 73,628. And then we've seen Bitcoin, I have it right here, in the last, what was it? I mean, it was at, wow, almost 106 on January 22nd. So that's 6 weeks ago. Is that right? Something like that, a little less, little around 6 weeks. Yeah. So, I mean, these are huge changes. They've happened when volatile things have taken place. I didn't mention, and I guess I should share too, when things were happening like in 2014, when the crash took place then, because there have been these crashes through these 4-year cycles, there were bad centralized exchanges that caused it. Back then it was something called Mt. Gox. We saw that again with FTX 2022, centralized exchanges crashing. I think that's another part of this energy that's shifting. You know, it's just like centralized hierarchical control and power. It can't continue through this energetic shift that we're going through. We're moving into Aquarian energies. It's more, it's more, it's not top down anymore. We're out of Capricorn. So I think that's important too. Jennifer says, I'm curious about staking. I'm planning to hold my seeds for at least 20 years. Awesome. I would like to put them to good use in the meantime, but I'm not sure how to stake. Cool. Thank you. That's a really important point. I should have talked about that. I apologize. Let me just see. Paul says, great live and much needed with all that's going on. Thanks, Paul. Any thoughts on BTC strategic reserves? So I'll answer Paul's question because I think it's quicker, and then I'll talk a little bit about staking / LPing too as the last thing. Thank you for asking these questions, y'all. Okay, so yeah, BTC, strategic reserves, which I assume by that you mean the thing that Trump's creating in the States. Yeah, so it seems like maybe that's going to be, I don't know, good for prices. I guess. I always feel so weird and ambivalent if it seems like something Trump's doing actually is good for the market. Like it, I don't know. I mean, when he first got elected, the market did go up a lot. So, I mean, institutionalization of these assets, I think it's like a stabilizing event since the Bitcoin ETF, the stock that trades on Bitcoin's price, was introduced in January of 2024. I mean, Bitcoin was making all time highs back then as a result of this stock being created. And as we kind of touched on earlier, I think because institutionals seem to be especially invested in Bitcoin, and they literally are, they're putting their money into it, that kind of holds the price up um, more significantly. Like it's not going to be as volatile. I don't think. I don't think it's going to drop as low as it would have percentage wise in previous cycles. And he'll put, I think they were talking about including Ether and maybe like Cardano and probably Doge, a couple other cryptocurrencies as well. You might know better than I do. You probably do know better than I do because you're asking about it. So I mean, that I guess stability is helpful. I mean, it's helpful for longevity, I suppose. I'm just skeptical of, as I've said, the design of these systems. So I guess I feel ambivalence when I can't like uniformly say like, yeah, I think it's really great or anything like that. But I think it probably will have a stabilizing effect on the market, and could be a boon at certain times too, like depending on news events. You could play different news events off of that to see, um, like when something is announced, it may drive the price up for a short period of time, and you could play that. Jennifer says, I'm curious about staking. Yeah, I already read this. Sorry. So I apologize. I should have talked about this in more depth earlier. So I shifted to calling it LPing, liquidity providing, because another thing that you can do with cryptocurrency has risen to prominence in the last few years, and it's also called staking, and it's confusing. So when I'm talking about seeds, LPing, I mean the same thing that I meant when I used the word staking years ago. Are you guys able to see me okay and hear me okay still? It seems like the connection got worse. So please let me know if the connection's bad for you. So, the other thing that we can do when the markets are volatile is you can really especially benefit from LPing your cryptocurrency, whether it's seeds or something else, because you're getting paid as people trade. So, like, as the markets come down and come up really rapidly, you're going to get paid more in fees if you're LPing. So, yeah, it's an especially okay, cool, good. Um, yeah, it's a good thing to do, an especially beneficial, profitable thing to do at times like this. And okay, great. Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Paul and Jennifer. Yeah, Jennifer. And I have like a couple video demos I could share with you. I mean, you could go to there's a short demo here on the how to stake page on the site. Do you know like specifically where you're running into confusion whenever you have looked at staking before? There's the link to the how to stake page on the site. So there's like a 5-ish minute demo there. But yeah, Jennifer, if you're able to like formulate questions about where specifically you're running into trouble, I'm totally happy to answer. I might have lost you. Not sure if you're still here. But yeah, if you go to this link that I just shared in the chat, you'll find the short demo there. And then if you try to do it and you're like, oh, this is confusing, I don't understand something, what you can also do is okay, cool. So you haven't seen that page. Yeah. So that's where to go to start, and you can watch that demo and see. And then if you have any other questions, um like you run into specific snags or anything, the best place to go is our Discord. We also have our FAQ so you can find answers to questions there. But I'll just link the Discord real quick too. Or actually, I think the Discord is linked since we're on YouTube. You should see it, I think, in the description, but it wouldn't hurt for me to do this also. I'll just give you the link to the Discord real quick. Yeah, so you can ask questions in the Discord, and you can search the Discord too to see if like anyone else has asked your question. But yeah, yeah, I if you're down to do that, it's so helpful. It's so like mutually beneficial. It's not without risk, of course, because like nothing in cryptocurrency is without risk. But like, yeah, if you're down to do that, if you're down to LP your seeds, yeah, there's the link to the Discord. Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, like if you're down to LP your seeds, that is what makes what we do possible. It's effectively our mutual aid pool. So that's why we've been able to help people in places like South Sudan where like women don't even have IDs and therefore can't open bank accounts, at least until very recently. I think things are starting to change. So that's so key to what we do at Seeds. And it once you know how to do it, it really only takes like a few minutes to do. So it may look a little technical or something at first, but it actually is pretty straightforward once you've kind of gotten the hang of how it works. Yeah, and if you have any questions, like I said, we'd be happy to answer them. All right, y'all, it's been almost an hour. Anything else you want to touch on? Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time and attention, for, any good energy, good thoughts you've sent to Seeds. If you're able to and interested in helping people in need through Seeds, you can do so at the link in the description and you'll receive Seeds cryptocurrency in thanks. And it's either going to be an equal or greater value than the value of your gift at the time you made your gift. So that's another thing. Seeds are down in the market right now as well. They've been down for a while. And so this can be an even more, if you're doing the thing where you want to, like feed two birds with one scone, you can help people in need and potentially benefit even more so if you're doing that. Like if you're making larger gifts when the market is down, you can get more seeds. And if the market goes back up, they could end up being even more profitable. So there's that too. Okay. All right. Thank y'all. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. So I hope y'all are doing okay. I hope you're feeling okay. Yeah, just want to send you solidarity and love. And I think after the next few years, maybe we could be living in a very different world that feels a lot more supportive and better for a lot of us. So yeah, I'm holding that vision and I hope that you will too. And I think that Seeds is going to be a part of it. Okay, thank you all. I'll catch you later. Bye.